Good evening, everyone. My name is Jessie Sunner. I'm the MLA for Surrey Newton and the Parliamentary Secretary for Anti-Racism Initiatives. I'm also the chair of the Special Committee on Democratic and Electoral Reform, which is a parliamentary committee consisting of members of the government, the official opposition, and the third party. We're meeting today in Cranbrook, which is located on the traditional territories of the Ktunaxa peoples. We'll be continuing with presentations related to democratic engagement, voter participation, and electoral reform. This committee is also accepting written submissions until July 25th. To participate, please visit our website at bcleg.ca/consultations. I'll now ask the members of the committee to introduce themselves, starting with the Deputy Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ward Stamer, MLA, Council North Thompson, and official critic for forests.
Emily Botterill.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Rob Botterill. I'm the MLA for Saanich North and the Islands and the Green Caucus House Leader.
Emily Shaw.
Good evening. My name is Amna Shah. I'm the MLA for Surrey City Centre and also the Parliamentary Secretary for Mental Health and Addictions. Very pleased to have you here today.
Emily Clare.
Hello, Sheldon Clare. I'm the MLA for Prince George North Caribou, and I'm the Conservative Caucus Deputy Whip.
Thank you. And assisting our committee today are Karen Rier and Kayla Wilson from the Parliamentary Committee's office, and Simon Delat and Dwight Schmidt from Hansard Services. So thank you, everyone, for being here. We will begin with Jim Wiedrich. Thank you for being here with us today, Jim. So just a reminder that you'll have your presentation, and then we'll open up the floor for questions.
Yeah, good evening. So my name's Jim. I'm an emerge physician in Nelson, and I treat allergic reactions all summer. And one of the things I want to declare is that I'm allergic to boring presentations. So I want to hopefully entertain you for 5 minutes, but give you a solid point of view. Hey, let's go back to 1971, the year of my birth, and let's think about a Canadian Contents song from the Five-Man Electrical Band. And the song's name is Signs. And it's got that amazing opening line. It's a real earworm. And the sign said, long-haired freaky people need not apply. And so, hey, we're not going to talk about music for my whole time, but here's the point. The point is that line is about generational discontent, about pointing out the hypocrisy of authority and how people are excluded. So what's my thought? My thought is that in the political process these days, independence and independent thinkers need not apply. So I have my own personal journey. I ran in the most recent federal election campaign as an independent in this federal election riding, Columbia, Kootenay, the South Rockies. And I spent a couple years putting together a solid platform and focused it around democratic rejuvenation, with the point that really we don't practice a true representative democracy in Canada, and that I thought that in real time we could use the technology of the 2020s to have constituents engage with their MP, as this case would be in the federal scene, in real time, telling me or whoever else the MP was what their actual point of view and what they wanted focused on was. But as I began to campaign, I met with the tsunami that, of course, is this magic fairy tale of strategic voting. And it serves the two polarized ends of the federal spectrum to push strategic voting narratives. But provincial politics across Canada is not immune to that either, and we can analyze that from the BC point of view. So strategic voting always is a way. You can't go for that guy because you got to prevent them. And I have tons of voters who would come up to me, including one very memorable, angry woman at a Kimberley forum that was like, why are you working to split the vote? And I'm like, you know what? The crime isn't that you don't agree with my policies or you're probably not going to vote with me. The crime is that you think I shouldn't be running because I'm going to split the vote. And all of that is brought to you by First Past the Post Incorporated, the company that keeps us all enshrined in the system that we have right now and continues to polarize us. And the natural consequence of it is that we entrench things and we make sure that party leaders or premiers are preeminent and that they don't even necessarily listen to their own elected representatives and end up with legislation such that perhaps they're proposing that Just they themselves and their cabinet should be able to carry on however they merrily wish and avoid having to answer to the elected legislature of the day. So everything should be a living, breathing organism. We should be able to go back and forth. We should be able to have people engaged in it, but we've cranked the cynicism meter up to about 100 in the general public, and we continue to go strategic voting, strategic voting, strategic voting. How do you escape that? How do you get back to a representative democracy? Well, it seems to me that the very wise people back in 2004 who participated in the Citizens' Assembly and came up with the notion that we actually needed proportional representation, and very specifically probably the best version of proportional representation was single transferable vote, were pretty wise. And I'm sorry that the threshold was 60% back then and we only made 57 point something. But the bottom line is, if we could get into a system where you didn't just have to be polarized, us, them, or maybe you had larger ridings and 3 or 4 members represented each riding, you could open it up to a quality independent voice, or more than just one party and people feeling marginalized and not getting their voices actually heard. And so that's the core of it. I think we have to just simply acknowledge that in today's politics, we're not truly practicing the representative democracy that was originally constructed in the way it was designed, and that as we look at the signs are everywhere that it's not really working. So status quo isn't the future. We've got to make a shift. Thank you for listening. I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
Thank you so much, Jim. Do we have any questions? MLA Clare.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your presentation, Doctor. I ran as an independent myself once upon a time back in 2015, and my experience, I'm sure, was similar to yours, in that what I found is that I wasn't going to win for a number of reasons. Now, I'm also interested in why you would think that STV and PR would lead to independents being successful in a situation where you would still have groups of individuals coalescing together to promote common interests and issues in a party system. And how would independents do in that when historically the percentage of votes for most independents, not all of them, but most, is usually extremely low?
Okay, I'll give you a practical example. So let's say we took the current number of ridings and divided by 4. In other words, we had 1/4 of the ridings we have now, but elected 4 members from each of those ridings. Well, in the last provincial election, to use a very Cranbrook example, a very experienced 7-year MLA would have been everybody's number 2 choice. And the local Conservative won, but Mr. Shapitka, who was running as an independent in that race, would almost certainly have been number 2 on everybody's preferential rank ballot. And then, in a STV version, he would have been the second of 4 people elected to the legislature. So I think the point is, STV would not guarantee independents would win, but it would at least give a credible chance for quality independents to potentially rise above the fray.
Okay. And if I may ask a follow-up, Madam Chair. In British Columbia, we have a tremendous variety of geography with our ridings. We have some ridings which have very dense and highly populated areas in very small geographic sections. And we have other ridings with large geographic areas with much smaller numbers of people. And the people in a lot of the particular, well, almost all the ridings, tend to like to know who their MLA is and like to feel they have a direct connection with that person, whether or not they voted for that individual. And I've encountered this with people who've come to see me or my staff at my office who have issues, and our policy is pretty clear, as it is, I believe, for most of my colleagues, that I don't care whether or not you voted for me. If you have a problem that I can assist you with, I'm going to do that. Now, in what you're proposing, where there would be multiple representatives for a much larger region, possibly with a larger population, I think what you would find is a shopping program where people would shop around to get the representative that they liked better, and it would become a bit of a popularity contest in terms of that. And right now, we do get requests from other ridings, and we're very clear that if you live in a particular constituency, you need to talk to your MLA. We're happy to help transition you to that by providing any information that's necessary. Sometimes you have property in one riding, and there's all these little overlaps. But how do you see a multi-member larger riding being able to provide the same level of service in a consistent way to such a varied area? And I'm thinking of my own riding, Prince George North Caribou, which extends from Williams Lake all the way up to College Heights in Prince George, includes larger population centers like Quesnel, but also includes smaller areas like Miocene or Big Bear Ranch or Cluskas or Nazco. And there's a lot of variety there. And I'm not sure that having a collection and trying to figure out who's representing whom, where, when would actually serve the people very well. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, my counterpoint is you already have a large geographical area. I don't think increasing it changes. And then there would be, in my example, 4 different people. Perhaps you would have an affinity or have a easier way to communicate with 1 or 2 of those 4. I don't see a problem with that. One of the blessings of the pandemic is Zoom, video calls. Again, I don't see a problem with that. And my last counterpoint is, sad to say that from my own engagement and interaction with people, 95% of people do not know who their local candidate is. They think they're voting for Mr. Carney, Mr. Poilievre, Mr. Eby, Mr. Rustad. Take your pick.
Joe Biden?
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, like, we can take any level of government you want. And that acknowledging that it's always a big barrier for independents to gain brand identification. The truth is that I would argue that very few MLAs in BC were elected on their own local popularity, but that they were much more likely elected as part of a party waiver movement or because people identified with the leadership group.
Thank you.
Thank you. MLA Shaw.
Thank you, Dr. Wiedrich.
Sure, Jim is okay.
Jim,
Yep.
okay.
Yep.
For your presentation. And I suppose I don't want to make any assumptions about your thoughts on certain things, but I think some of the strategic voting issue that you talk about a lot of times can be driven by partisanship and hyper-partisanship and just the general public and those who are just very partisan folks drive that narrative as what you had encountered in your efforts in door knocking. I'm wondering, given that being the case, if there was a multi-member, let's say, riding, and there was an opportunity provided, maybe a bit more equitably so or equally so to independents, do you think that it would be possible for that partisanship, that hyper-partisanship to kind of dissipate a little bit? Or could it be a scenario in which it all just remains? I mean, I see the value of having a multi-member riding, actually, because it would set the stage for some consensus building amongst members. But I'm wondering about the culture of our communities and our province and our country, and whether that's culture is conducive to your vision of what it should look like.
My argument is that the system, the way it is effectively locking in the partisanship.
I see.
And that in order to break free of that, it would take a lot of work. Maybe people like me can be part of it, but frankly, there has to be a lot of melting of cynical hearts, and there would have to be a lot of engagement. And people would have to come to believe that if I was their representative, that I actually cared, that I wasn't just banging the drum and making put-down statements against my opponents, but that I was actually focused in a collaborative fashion at solving the problems of my local constituency. And I think for the first iteration of that, everybody would be a skeptic. It would take a concerted effort to make people move in a better direction. But I'm telling you that we are just a time lag for our neighbors to the south, and it's going bad down there. So if we just carry on in the same way, we already know how our path is charted. We got to break free of that, and I think that is a long, hard journey, but it's one that's worth taking.
Thank you.
Deputy Chair.
Thanks very much, Madam Chair. Thanks very much for your presentation. First up, I disagree with your example of the U.S. because there's some significant differences between their levels of government and our levels. One is the fact that their party entrenchment is much older than ours, generational, and the second thing is they have unlimited funds, and it's more about the money and the power than it is here. So I would suggest that it's not quite the same. But let me ask you a question, because we've gone through 2 days of this, and sometimes we have a lot of additional information that we've heard from other people. So when we ask a question, it may sound like it takes 15 minutes to go through the question. But let me ask you specifically, what difference would it make if 10% of the legislature was, say, specifically environmental concerns driven? So it's only 10% of legislatures that are in that House, and you're saying that they'll be able to, identify with those voters that feel disenfranchised with the other legislators that are there. So how is that going to change the other 50%, 40%, 90%? Of the members that are in that House when they only account for 10%, and you come up for a vote on something? How is that going to change the dynamics of what we have right now?
So each legislature is its own unique entity. It's its own salad. It'll have its own flavors. It'll be predominant X, predominant Y, something like that. But the ultimate point is that there has to be a new spirit of consensus building, and for us to escape the notion that 38% or 43% means you have a majority for 4 years and you don't have to listen to anybody. You don't even have to listen to any of the members of your committee. If the party leader or the premier wants to do something, they're just going to bloody well do it whether they want your opinion or not. So there's no exact answer to your question, but the examples in Europe, for example, are that then there has to actually be consensus building. The most recent election in Germany forced parties to come together and find common interests and then form a governing coalition based on that. It's a dynamic process, and it should be dynamic. What we've established in our own system is this very kind of static thing where there is a moment of democracy on election day, and then there's no real democracy for the next 3-4 years.
If I may, to add to that, we've talked about additional free votes, trying to maybe see if there's a way that either we can legislate where you can have confidence votes and where you can't have confidence votes. But we talked in Prince George of a scenario is that even if you had a tight majority like we have right now, and you have 3 or 4 or 5 people in that caucus that believe that the way the policy is being driven is not being representative of the people of the province. But you have to understand that if you end up flipping it upside down and going to a non-confidence and the government goes down, the leader of those parties have the ability not to sign your re-up papers for re-election. So 70% of the people in Cranbrook could ask their representative to vote a certain way, so that could make the difference in bringing the government down. Is those 70% of the voters going to turn around and vote for that person if he's independent or she's independent? Because that's a viable. So you can put the guardrails on some of these things that we're talking about. So we have more consensus. We have more opportunities through committees and with public engagement like this to be able to bring that to the table. And if there's poor legislation, not just ram it through, but be able to go back and relook at what we can do to fix it. there's going to be limits on how we do that in our parliamentary system. So how are we going to change that, even though we would allow more free votes?
It actually is going to have to be systemic. I actually thought there was definite points of hope in the way you framed your comments there, because the concept is that right now, the media consensus, as soon as there's a little bit of discord amongst the BC Conservative Party, is, oh my gosh, how come the leader can't keep all his team in alignment? And that's immediately the headline, which is a lousy, silly headline. It should be, a few people in the BC Conservative caucus took a different point of view. Well, bless them. Maybe that's not great for certain points of advantage for the leadership group, but at least they had a take, and they were willing to put it forward. But that's the thing. Like, we have conditioned the media, who then condition everybody in society that it's just got to be the way Mr. Eby wants or Mr. Rustad wants. And then we practice our politics to kind of live up to that. But, you know, if one by one, we take down the barriers to that or stop reinforcing it every time we have a news cycle, then I actually think there's hope again. So I recognize that it would be a sea change, but it absolutely has to start somewhere. And as I look at the hopeful possibilities, it's down that path, because the one we're on right now just is leading to further entrenchment and troubles.
Thank you for that.
MLA Botterill.
Thanks for your presentation today. Something that's come up in earlier in this week is the how, and specifically, what would be your view on how a government would proceed with, if it chose to, a form of proportional representation? What's your view on having another referendum? What's your view on having another referendum after pro-rep has been tried out? What's from your perspective, if there was a decision, how would you see it unfolding?
So if you're into conspiracy theories, like many people think that 5-6 years ago, it was set up in such a way so it was doomed to fail. And it's an unfortunate thing, but everybody in this room fits into a 1% category. The 1% of the population that really actually cares about politics and how that works. And even though many people in my circle of influence are well-educated and lovely people, they don't actually care about how the sausage gets made, like from Alexander Hamilton the musical. But it either is the simplest of binary referendum questions, or we start educating the public from the legislature now and have it be part of the next provincial election, and keep it rock simple. Do you want X? Yes or no? Not maybe, and then what 3 things and some other stuff. Like, none of the convoluted stuff, because people need it to be crystal clear. And no, I wouldn't then say, well, we needed a follow-up referendum after that. You know, I would be interested if anyone here knows why 60% was picked back in 2004, because off the top of my head, I don't know. What was it, the 60%? Some supermajority concept? Why wasn't it 67%? But anyway, in their wisdom, they picked 60%, and then they helped make it fail back then too.
So just to follow up, so the idea of educating the public, implementing a form of pro-rep for the next election, and then having a referendum, a simple one, is off the table from your perspective, or?
Well, I just want to make sure I understand. So I'm basically saying that at the time of the next provincial election, we could easily have a second half of the ballot that was a yes or no on a simple kindergarten-style question. No convoluted stuff that's intended to obfuscate or kind of make it muddy or somehow tip somebody's hand. Just super crystal clear question.
Right, and I'm just asking for your view on another option,
Yeah.
which has occurred in at least one other jurisdiction where pro-rep is implemented in the next election, a form of pro-rep, and then people try it out. And then, in the following that, they have a referendum, decide whether they want to carry on with that or go back to first past the post.
My own just top-of-mind judgment is that ultimately, in order to keep the cynicism down, we would need the public to feel like it had been approved by them. Otherwise, there's always going to be folks who have an angle of complaint. That's my take.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. And my question is, you mentioned at the beginning that you preferred single transferable vote. Yep. And I just, we've heard from many folks over the last few days, and that's not been the choice from some folks, as for others. So just wanted to get your thoughts on why you think that's the preferred method of pro-rep.
Because it has the highest opportunity to make sure that, as Mr. Clare pointed out, you have a local representative. You're not just pulling from party lists. And clearly, I'm happily announcing my bias as an independent, and that I think that it allows for high-quality people who are willing to work outside of a party system to also potentially have a voice. Other forms, like, for example, mixed member and whatnot, still are stuck very heavily in leaning to entrenched parties and parties that already exist. And there is a lack of real kind of dynamism that then people are kind of suppressed in their choices when you go to those kind of systems, and you have less opportunity to have people who are from your local geography or truly know your local geography.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I don't see any further questions, so thank you so much for taking the time to travel here from Nelson and be a part of this hearing today and to share your thoughts with us.
Yes. Thank you for hearing my passion. All right.
Thank you.
Next, we have Mary Jane Blackmore. Welcome, Mary Jane. So once you're done your presentation, you'll have an opportunity for questions, and you can start when you're ready.
Okay, thank you. Thank you to the committee for hearing my voice today. My name is Mary Jane Blackmore from Yakanuki Territory in Creston. I'm a mom, a school board trustee for School District 8, a mayoral candidate, and a teacher. I'm here today to share my combined words with that of Nicole Charlwood, who is disappointed she was unable to make the long trip from Nelson to speak with you herself. Thank you to the committee members for allowing me to represent. Nicole and I have campaigned together, and I'm honored she asked me to speak in her place today for our Kootenay region. She is a 2-time MLA candidate, a 2-time MLA campaign manager, a 3-time campaigner for local government candidates, including her own time as city councillor, a campaigner for the West Kootenay Eco Society and Neighbours United, and she canvassed for the Fair Vote BC during the 2018 referendum. When Nelson, Creston, now our riding of Kootenay Central, voted over 70% in favour of proportional representation. Let's just say the two of us together have a combined background to offer this plea. Let's be the politicians we want to see in the world right now. Strategic and compassionate, smart and fair. In our corner of the province, you don't have to knock on many doors to see how deeply people feel that our democracy is not working for them. We've spent tens of thousands of hours deep canvassing, talking to people on porches, one-to-one in barns and at kitchen tables. I see that more and more people are stepping away from politics altogether. We are tired of our neighbors fighting. We are tired of the sense that politics divides us instead of bringing us together. Let me tell you about a conversation I had not long ago, standing at a farm gate on a dirt road in Creston. I was talking to a neighbor who told me they have always voted, every election, but now they just cannot see the point. My vote doesn't count, it never changes anything, they said. Another voter said, it would be nice to fully believe in what we are voting for. Right now, we are voting to keep out what we don't want. That's the heartbreak we are facing in the majority of people, and that's what we risk if we don't change. We cannot ignore the largest political group right now, and it's not any party, it's the non-voters. People who look at our system and feel they don't belong in it, and let's be frank, is the privilege that often get into politics for the most part. And when that happens, we lose trust, we lose community, and we lose the shared hope that democracy can make our lives better. We believe we have a moral obligation to fix this before we slide further into anger, cynicism, or worse. We know you will hear from experts on the details and the models. But what I want to leave with you today is this. As politicians, we have an obligation to constituents first, and we can choose to make every vote count. We need a system where people see their communities reflected in our government. We need a system where no voice is wasted. And we need it in place for the next election and held for a minimum of 2 terms to truly test viability. There is no time to waste if we don't want to jump into the sandbox with oligarchs. People want you and us, their representatives, to act with courage. We've had referendums, we've done the studies. It's time to deliver. In Nelson Creston, New Kootenay Central, we have shown that when people believe their vote matters, they show up. A cross-partisan fair vote team met with our MLA, and she is relying on your recommendations. We know we can show up for each other when we show up for true democracy. Nicole and I will keep doing our part, listening to our neighbors, knocking on doors, and helping people see how they belong in this process. I hope you will do your part too. Thank you for listening, and thank you for the work you're doing to rebuild trust in democracy. And I'm available for questions.
Thank you, Mary Jane. Go to MLA Clare.
Thank you, Mary Jane. I appreciate your presentation. You were saying that voter turnout, or the non-voters are the largest group, but in reviewing the voter turnouts for the last several elections from 1996 to the current one in British Columbia, what we have seen is a range of voter turnout from as high as 71.5% down to the low during the COVID election of 53.86%. And it's been moving up, like it moved up to nearly 60% in this last election. So there does seem to be interest in politics, and certainly your efforts and those of your friend are also part of making that interest happen. So you should be lauded for that, because getting people involved and interested in something which to many seems to be an annoyance is a positive thing. What ways do you see in engaging those who have chosen to disengage outside of fundamental changes to the system? Like, if we were going to start building something different, you usually have to have a foundation and you build and improve things. What other things do you suggest could be done to get more people interested in the voting process?
Yeah, so my first question, so those numbers you stated, is that all eligible aged people?
That is all registered voters and voters who turned out from elections British Columbia.
Okay. You said registered voters.
Registered voters.
Yeah, so, okay.
That's the only people
So
who can
bringing
vote.
in new people, non-voting people who've never voted, that's been a really interesting conversation at the doors. I knocked on doors for 4 months straight in this last election, and really interesting how many disheartened people that there are, and really is something I'm passionate about. So thinking of ways, for one, to show relevance to our system, to the everyday people, and how their voice is tied in to create that change. And for one, there is a general lack of understanding of how our system even works. I think you had talked about public education around some of this stuff. Of course, I think that's where I'm a school teacher. I do think about those gaps frequently, and how can we break that down? I also really struggle when thinking in the processes around our partisan system in the legislature. I've followed a lot of the work of Adam Olson, and him talking about all party committees within the legislature, how breaking down those party boundaries, even as the seating system within the legislature, and if we saw the work more around the work and less around party lines, I think, does that make sense? And like he talked about a regional caucus rather than party caucuses, and that just made so much sense to me, where, we've been working on, I'm just going to use an example of medical transportation, which is a major issue in this region, yet our MLAs might not even be sitting next to each other. They might not even be having those conversations in the legislature, just by design of the format of the seating. So I do think that that's your question, where I do think that even structural, I hope that these things are being talked about in this legislature, because that where I don't know if I'm answering your question, but it does feel like it's a decolonizing even the structure within the legislature that I think has become where we feel disenfranchised with, party politics, probably.
Just follow up a little bit.
Yes.
You do see on the television, of course, question period, which is a half an hour.
Yeah.
And it's a slice, a very small slice of what actually happens at the legislature. Most of the time, members, we're involved in committee work. These are multi-party committees where we're working at various issues. We do things like estimates, where we're questioning, the opposition members question government members about budget choices and so on. We are also working to resolve issues from our various constituencies by engaging in face-to-face and representative meetings with government, opposition meeting with government, and trying to find out how things can change. Sometimes you have to do things to get attention to get that change. Sometimes you have to be very pragmatic, but it all involves reaching across the room and working in a collaborative fashion. I mean, even on committees such as this, and we're missing 2 members for very good reasons, we are all here working towards the same goal. This is a collaborative relationship in the existing legislature. So I think probably a challenge we have is to provide more education about exactly how the legislature does work, and so that more people are aware of that, because I think there are perceptions that may not be completely accurate. Now, when you look in the media, of course, the tradition is one of accountability. The opposition holds the government to account. The government has a policy and defends it. So I'm thinking education, perhaps. Is that a better thing to look at in civics, in high school, I mean, I taught for
Of course.
37 years in
Of course.
K-12 and post-secondary.
Yeah.
So
I think that's probably always the answer. There's huge gaps there,
for sure.
of course. Yeah.
Thank you. Deputy Chair?
Thanks very much, Madam Chair. Yeah, thanks for the discussion and coming all the way from Nelson. That's great. A couple of things you mentioned on and being a teacher. We've had discussions in the last couple of days of getting our youth more involved. We know social studies 10 has part of the curriculum on elections, but we don't know exactly how in depth they are and what the level of engagement is throughout K-12 on specifically educating people on exactly what's going on. But a couple of things that came up, and I'll talk to this one first and then ask you a specific question. Some of the challenges we have is, and I brought this up yesterday, is we have committees that don't really sit. But really by law they should. But because of the mechanism, unless you specifically almost force the government to do it, they don't. There's committees that haven't sat for 10 or 15 years. One's on BC Hydro, Crown Corporations, things like that. So, I mean, if I was the Premier, I would want committees to sit similar to what we do in estimates, so that there is actually a bit of a public engagement in that portion, so that if you had a specific ask for your MLA to ask at that committee meeting, you could actually do it and it's on TV. So I would like to be able to have that opportunity. But back to your question about some kind of STV or having proportional representation. What would you specifically like to have changed, or what is this government not doing for you in your concerns? I mean, this government's been in power for 8 years, so we're apolitical in this committee. But the reality is, the government's been sitting for eight years. So specifically, what needs to change, or would you want to change specifically to yourself and your friends around you that hasn't been occurring? So what specifically, is it housing? Is it healthcare? Is it the economics? What is specifically not happening that you would want to happen in your life?
First, I want to say, how much time do we have?
Well, I mean, you can categorize it. You're a teacher. You can categorize it, but I need. Can you give me a couple of specifics?
Yeah, protection of old growth and watersheds is massive in our region. Clear cutting on private land is something that needs to be addressed. It is disastrous in this area. The amount of unregulated unmanaged forestry. Ridiculous. My family's been in forestry for 30 years.
So I've been in forestry for 40 years, so I have a little bit of background. You're asking specifically on private land?
The private land is a major issue around here because of the strip logging, and there's no regulation around watersheds protection. Anyway.
Understood.
But protecting old growth areas and watersheds, like the regulation around that. We have the Duck Creek watershed in the Windle area, and I've been on the board of Wildsite for many years, and just a ridiculous amount of volunteer professional hours, people putting into this just to save our friggin' water. And the inability for the government to respond because of the lack of policy to protect these very fragile resources. And we've seen the effects of the disruption to migrating animals and then inability to protect water, the landslides, the fire that is so critical in our lifestyle here. I'm actually talking about elk herds in the Creston Valley that are getting fenced off from access to water because of new cherry farms coming in and massive elk fences going in by the mile, and lack of water regulation and lack of ability to protect the salmon spawning channels. And the water levels in the Goat River and the temperature of the water. But particularly, it's I see it boiling back to the inability to regulate anything around water on private land and the massive tracts of private land that there are in this area, because, and it goes back to the contracts with the railroads and why there's so much private land in this area. That back in, I guess you would know this, but back when Tembec was managing the land, it was private land and it was well managed, but now it's being sold off to the highest bidder, and the strip logging in this area is disastrous. All up through, going up to Elkford, up in that area. And when you have guys that have been in forestry for 30 years coming in and going, like, big eyes going, what's happening up there is horrifying. Like, these mountains will not recover. These water systems, there's logging down through the river, over the mountain, down through the next river, and no protection.
Well, I'll give you my, if I may, thank you for that.
Yeah.
I'll give you my card, and as luck would have it, I'm actually talking to the Forest Minister this Monday in the Legislature, so I will certainly bring that to his attention.
Please
and,
do.
I'll
I know
give you my
it's
card,
massive
and we
here.
can keep in contact on that.
Yeah,
as
for
an
sure.
opposition forest critic. Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm just going to follow up on that question and kind of bring it back to our mandate here. So looking at the concerns that you've had over time, and whether it's with the government or the local MLA not representing your views when it comes to the issues, how do you see that being different under a pro-rep system? Like, taking this live example, what you're saying, if we were in a pro-rep system, how do you envision that being different?
This is nonpartisan, but I specifically have been door knocking for the Green Party, and particularly I know the Green Party would be much more well represented, and like door knocking for the Green Party, it was wild to see the shift from when the writ was dropped, the fear in people's eyes, and people going, oh, I have to vote this way because I'm so scared that this other way will happen, not because I don't want to support the Green Party. The Green Party is well represented in this area and has a strong hold, but we just can't make progress. So I think that we would benefit in, I don't want a two-party system. I think that there's a lot of reasons that having more voices in the center and balancing out that polarizing equation is useful. And I do think that alternate voices at the table would really benefit our system. And I know that under proportional representation, the Green Party in surveys would get about 15% of the vote just in the last election, but that's not represented in the legislature. And I think that would be a massive shift that would make sense to a lot of people, that those voices could be better served in the legislature.
Thank you. MLA Botterill.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your presentation. The Chair just started with the question I was going to ask, and I'll follow it up in this way. In the 2024 election, if we had a form of electoral system that generated a number of seats proportional to the vote, the BC Green Caucus would be 8 instead of 2. In the 2020 election, it would have been 13 instead of 2. In the 2017 election, it would be 15 instead of 3. And to the Deputy Chair's point of view, the ability, there's no guarantees that with a larger caucus, it would lead to the changes that you're expressing concern about. But certainly a larger caucus would give the Green Caucus, in this particular instance, a greater influence and greater presence in the legislature to represent green concerns, and the very concerns you're identifying. And so I guess, this is turning into a speech, and I'm supposed to be asking a question. So let me ask a question, which is, how do you see proportional representation in the riding you're in, changing your ability to have your concerns taken forward?
I'm hopeful, and to your comment earlier, I guess you're saying that regional representation is already a major. I think it's certainly the goal, and having Green, I think that the party platform of the Green Party is a well-rounded, costed platform that represents all sections. It's not just an environmental platform, I guess is what I'm saying. And I do see the ability of the Green Party to not just stay with their party. They've stated that their MLAs are not whipped and can vote in any direction that they feel aligned with. And that just makes more sense in legislature to me than feel like you have to be dedicated to only what your party puts forward. And quite frankly, I don't agree with the party whip. I think that we should put party politics aside once we enter that room, and we should be working for the regional needs of the province, which the things that are very important to me are provincial, with education, healthcare, housing, protecting our forests and water. And I think the most important level of government that we have. And I do get frustrated that we have these divisive lines in provincial politics. I think it misleads and misguides the level of importance of the work. And so I wish that we would diminish that the party politics as much as we can, and whichever party you were elected to represent. And did I answer your question?
No, that's great. I was just curious about, right now you've expressed some significant concerns about issues within your riding. And
I could go on to housing and healthcare and medical transportation.
And you mentioned at the outset of your presentation that there is a significant portion of your riding, or members in your riding, residents you're riding, who are feeling, what's the point in voting? And then you'd made the case for pro-rep. So I was just curious to see how you saw pro-rep unfolding. So that's great. Thanks.
Yeah. I think that pro-rep is, like, just from door knocking and the hundreds of hours of conversations at the door, I think that it's something that would make a lot of sense to people. I think it would be quite easy, whatever that public education campaign needs to look like. And I agree with the previous speaker that it needs to be quite straightforward. Whatever the researchers and advice is to this committee, that whatever we present to the public needs to be very straightforward. And people are busy. They have a lot of things to think about. If they have to go do 3 hours of research on it to try to understand it, they just don't have the time. They really need to feel that they're being held in this area. And I know we have a lot of smart, caring people doing the work. So whatever we present to people, I think it was you, Rob, who stated something about maybe there's an opportunity to go into this next election with proportional representation, and just give it a try.
That's an option that's open to the government, and it's been raised a couple of times. So with the previous presenter, I was just asking what their view was of taking that approach of implementing it and then having a referendum.
Yeah, I wonder. I honestly would be in favor of that. I think that there's maybe an opportunity as we do campaigning for the next cycle to kind of lead as in however the decision was made. We're all doing a lot of public education as we're door knocking and bringing people up to speed on that, and then how that could better represent people. I think it would be quite well received, personally.
Great. I don't see any further questions, so thank you so much, Mary Jane, for your time.
Thank
today.
you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Next up is
yes.
Andrea Dunlop.
Thank you.
Welcome, Andrea. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you. I wondered if you'd write. I'm just gonna.
So again, you just have time for presentation, and we'll ask questions once you're done.
Oh, then I'll get my hair. Okay. So I want to start by thanking you again. I've been writing down answers to all the questions you guys have been asking. Okay, so they're very complex questions at times. I imagine you guys have had such an education in the last little bit yourselves. So I'm sure I'm repeating what many other presenters have said. So first, thank you for doing this, because I think it is a very timely conversation to be having, because we're talking about a healthy democracy. That's basically what we're getting at. My name is Andrea Dunlop. I was a candidate in the last provincial election, and I am proud to call the Columbia River Revelstoke and Windermere my home on the unceded territory of the Ktunaxa and Shuswap people. I'm here today to speak on behalf of rural communities, which are often left behind by the first-past-the-post system, both by the governments elected and political parties. In my riding, we saw the effects firsthand. The candidate who won ran as a Conservative, but started the campaign as a Liberal. Many believe he's philosophically a Liberal, but why the switch? It was to avoid vote splitting on the right. That is not a reflection of the parties or the candidate's values. It's a reflection of a system that forces people and parties to play games rather than serve voters. Even in our recent federal election, I was asked repeatedly, how should I vote to get the results closest to their values? They knew the system well enough to know they could not vote for the candidate they wanted. They needed to be strategic to block the person they didn't want to get in. That is not a healthy democracy. As a New Democrat, I value what the Green Party stands for, especially when it comes to protecting our environment. But in ridings like mine, vote splitting between the NDP and the Greens often hands the win to someone neither of us supports. Instead of collaboration, we get competition, and our shared values are lost. First past the post may be simple, but it's not fair. It creates safe seats where voters feel ignored. So many people in Cranbrook. And it encourages majority governments that can sideline the voices of smaller rural communities. It discourages people from voting with their hearts. In countries that use PR, voter turnout is higher because people know their vote matters. Voters know their voice will be reflected in the outcome. International studies indicate that citizens in countries with proportional representation report greater satisfaction with their democracy. And the strongest, most stable democracies in the world, they use proportional representation systems. PR is fairer, it is more inclusive, it creates legislatures that reflect the people they represent, and it fosters cooperation over division. If we want a democracy that works for all of BC, we need to move beyond the first-past-the-post system. Rural voices matter, and so should every vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea.
Okay.
Are there any questions for Andrea? MLA Shaw?
Thank you for your presentation. And we have been learning a lot over the last couple of days. Sometimes it's a bit of an overload, but I think what's definitely not lost on me, much like my colleagues, is the importance of system and structure in sort of setting the stage for the types of conversations that can potentially happen. And we take an example, this table in itself, and kind of what we've learned together and our shared values at this table and what we're working for and what we're working towards. So I appreciate not just you, but everybody in this room who take the time out to do that, because I think we all share that value. My question is similar to MLA Claire's with the previous presenter about education around government systems and exposure of students to the types of governance structures that exist, not just here in Canada, the first past the post in BC, but across the world, as a way of preparation or understanding that there are different types of governance system, whether you prefer it or not, that's a different question. And also the importance of civic education, because one of the things that is quite obvious in what we've heard in the last few days is there are not a lot of people who know not only who their MLA is or who their candidates are in an election, but they also, think that some of the other systems are far too complicated, maybe in the way that it was presented to them, maybe in the format that it was presented to them, or maybe some have even claimed that, it was purposely done so in that way as well. So given that, could you comment on the importance to the education piece? And also, if you were to sort of have it your way, is there a particular system that you would prefer, proportional representation system?
I don't want to say which one I prefer because I'm hoping you guys are learning. That's what I think you're here. That's your job. You're supposed to be hearing and you're finding. There are people out there that have done it. We shouldn't be reinventing the wheel. We know we can look at countries where it's successful, and we should be following those systems. There's a nonpartisan organization called Civics that runs every single time there's an election in any jurisdiction across Canada. They run an election in high schools, and the schools sign up, and then they have a voter ballot boxes and ballots that look exactly like their parents are going to do. And so they start as young as grade 6 or 5, as long as the teachers, and they start learn. And the reason Civics does that is to teach kids, because the learner, as soon as you start voting, there's a good chance you'll continue voting. So we're trying to get kids in this educational system to start voting in grade 6, and then in grade 8, and then in grade 10. And by the time they get out of high school, this voting thing is they're comfortable with it. So there needs to be an education for our voters. I actually prefer the idea of let's just go for it. I'm going to trust that you guys are going to do and make the best decision not for the parties, not for the legend. You're going to make what's best decision for the voters of BC. And if the best thing is for BC and for the voters is to have proportional representation, then let's do it. And let's give it 2 times. I agree. People can learn, and at the same time, we're learning everyone in the school is going to be learning. We're going to have to. That's what's going to have to happen. Every time there's something new, the schools have to teach it. So the kids will learn how to use it and how it works, and they're going to do comparing. And with that, each time, in 8 years, that's a lot of kids who've come through the system who will be aware of the system as well, new voters. It will be, if we bring it in, we will have higher voter engagement because everyone will know the ballot makes a difference. And they will see themselves in the legislature. They'll see their values in the legislature. And they won't have to vote against something. They can vote for something, which would be quite nice too.
Thank you.
Okay.
My question, as you said, we are doing a lot of learning, and as we do this, a lot of the answers are that it's not for one individual to decide what the format should be. We should leave it to the experts and figure that out. But I do think it's important to know what is important to individuals. So, for example, in earlier conversation today, we talked about regional representation and having, multiple representatives in one area.
Yep.
And some of the questions that I had previously, which I'll ask you, is, how would you envision that working in a way that works? So in some systems, it's one, like a local rep, like we have now, and then top up of regional reps. And my question there was, how do we see the responsibilities? Are they different for the regional rep versus the local rep? How would you want to see them? How do we navigate? For myself, I come from a very densely populated riding where anytime we are in our riding, we are going to be in community all day long, everywhere. It's much tougher in a rural riding. You can't go from, Prince George to Quesnel in 20 minutes and be there for another community event. So the strains are different. So I just, as a resident, as a community member, how would you envision a model that serves the community but still gets the pro-rep model going?
I think when you have a local issue, you go to your local representative. But when you have a forestry issue, you go to your forestry person. When you have, that's what I do now. If I have a problem, it's generally around an issue, and I go to the person who's responsible for that issue. And if they're working together, because that's it's leading to it. Then we're all. It doesn't matter who I speak to. I'm speaking to somebody who's representing me. I think the region. I think if you have, for example, if you have two people with completely different views on something within the same riding, that could be very interesting. And obviously, I would go to the one who perhaps reflects me better, and then hope and that and reflects my values more closely. But like you said, you don't care who voted for you if when somebody comes to you right now, and if they didn't vote for you, you're still going to represent them because that's your job. And I don't think it matters who's there. That's the job, is to look after the voters and make sure they're getting what they need. They're protecting their water, they're protecting their forests, etc.
I would just challenge that one bit, which is, what I would be concerned with myself in something that is creating more levels that lead to more silos. When you're leading to, if you go to one person and they have to connect with another, and then they have to connect with the ministry, and then this, that can in itself, even currently, the system can sometimes feel there's still barriers. So that would be something that I if you have thoughts on it, please feel, but I think in my mind, it would be a struggle to make sure we're not creating more silos and we're actually breaking down the systemic barriers that folks have in engaging with government.
Right now, I've lived in a riding that hasn't had a representative in the government in decades, forever. So, because when it was NDP, we were conservative we were NDP. So I can assure you, we're in a silo. And I'd like to get out of it. So that would be, we see it, we know it. And it's, who do we talk to? And we've got a really good representative. I know that if we went and talked to him right now, he's going to stand up he's going to look after us. However, it has been difficult. And that's why some people were voting, okay, how do we vote to ensure not just that we get somebody in government this time, so we get some of our values looked after and some of the things that are important to our communities looked after. And in that way, in this case, with proportional, we would automatically have somebody looking after us.
Thank you. Deputy Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks so much for the conversation. This is great. You kind of answered my question a little bit, but I just looking through your history when you ran as an NDP candidate in the last election, and so I'm just going to ask a question. And again, we're being apolitical here, but if the NDP has been in power since basically 3 elections, and John Horgan was in the last referendum that we had, and you mentioned that you've never been had the opportunity where your riding has been in power, yet. Why haven't your concerns still been? Why is there still concerns if this government's been in power for 8 years?
So even before that, when the Conservatives were in, we had NDP representatives. Right. So it was. Yeah. It's been
liberal. You mean Liberals?
Sorry, Liberals. Yes.
Right.
Sorry.
So my question is, and I'm not trying to be political about it, but if you were leaning on the NDP side of things for whatever the policies that they were supporting or you were supporting. They've been in government for 8 years. Why haven't they been able to address your concern?
Because my local representative hasn't supported some of those things that I wanted.
Can you give me a couple of specifics?
Healthcare. I actually don't really want to see. Again, this seems like it's getting too political.
The reason I'm asking the question, I'm trying to be political, but we're trying, as Rob, as MLA Bottrell asked in the last question, was that it would have a different dynamic in the legislature if we had rep by pop, or not rep by pop, but a proportional representation, where there could be anywhere between 8 to 10 or 12 Green candidates, or that type of an independent candidate versus the two main parties, the two main left and right parties. So my question, and again I asked Mary Jane the same question, is what specific concerns aren't being addressed if you have some of those concerns that you have are party policies in those parties. Why haven't they been addressed why haven't they been able to address your concerns? Regardless of who the MLA is, the government should still be able to address your concerns. Because that's part of the whole thing, is if we're in the legislature and all of a sudden somebody puts their hand up and go, hey, I want to talk about the environment. Yeah. Instead of 1 or 2 people, now you got 10 people. Mm-hmm. And I asked the question earlier, what difference does it make? If it's only 10% of the people that are there and the rest of the people don't want to talk about it, you're not going to go anywhere. So what's the difference whether you have 2 people or 10 people? That's my point. What's the difference? I'm not saying I don't agree with PV, because we've had some really good conversations and I'm looking at all the options just like the rest of the committee. But what difference does it make if there's 5 people or 10 people or 2 people if you still don't have a majority?
Because in a proportional representation, I can assure you far more Green parties will be elected than 10%. It will be more than that, because people will be able to, they'll know that they're not voting one way to, like, they're, in my opinion, there will be more, like, this isn't a, if anyone's being apolitical, it's me, because this is not good for the, like, this isn't good for the NDP. This isn't a great thing, because it's always been the NDP or whatever against the right. So what I'm suggesting isn't going to be good for the NDP. This is good for the Greens, which is really important for voters. This is going to be really good for some of the, small, like, this isn't. So I would suggest rather than talk about the parties, let's talk about the voters. And that's what it's supposed to be about. And if we want them to be engaged and we want them to vote and we want to see them and they want to see themselves in the legislature, then we're going to have to change the system. Because right now. I understand.
Yeah, and I appreciate that.
Yeah.
MLA Botterill.
Oh, sorry.
I had a couple of questions. I'll do the one that's related to proportional representation first, and then shift to the second question. In terms of proportional representation, maybe you could just summarize your view of how in the writing you described it would give voice to a particular segment of the electorate. We've had a lot of discussion about how it might or might not affect what happens in the legislature, but in terms of what does it do for electors in the riding, how does it benefit them?
Because they can vote for what they want. They don't have to vote against anything. They can. So I think, and then the percent of people who vote for something, they will see that those values will be reflected, hopefully, in the decisions and the policy that's created in the future. Right. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to improve democracy here. That's the point, not the political system, not the party system, the democracy. And that's what's at risk right now around the world. Right. And I think it's good that you guys are doing this, because it is at risk. This is timely. And I think a change to ensure that people are engaged and realize that their vote does matter, so they can say all the crap they want on Facebook, but when it comes down to it, when it comes to the vote, do they want that or not? And because now it matters.
Right. So if 10% vote their values, they're going to see 10% of the legislature reflecting their values.
That would be the interesting part, because I would wonder what is the percent that it doesn't reflect. Like, what percent? Like, what is because we do have we're going to have those extremes, and what percent of the extreme? Like, what percent doesn't get reflected?
Right.
Because I don't think everything should be reflected.
Right, and there's
so there's got to be a point.
Yeah, and in the design of the system, you can build thresholds into.
And we don't have to reinvent. We don't have to invent that. That's already been done extraordinarily successfully in other countries.
So here's a second question, which is a complete off into another topic area, but just briefly, I want to, because of your background and experience. So a number of presenters. Both my age and youths and everything in between have recommended reducing the voting age to 16. What's your view on that?
I'm a high school teacher, and I have asked my kids that a lot, what they think. And it is really interesting. First of all, many of them think that they don't have the education to do it. Like, they don't think they're responsible enough to do it. And then when I say, well, do you know the leaders? Do you know the political parties? Do you know where they stand on a spectrum? They all do, which is significantly better than a lot of people. So do I want to see it to 16? One thing I'd love about it is that suddenly you guys, everyone would have to start listening to them. And there might be more basketball courts rather than pickleball courts. There might be...
That's a great point. Write that one down. Yeah. I can use that.
Yeah. There might be, access to colleges and universities being affordable would be something, because you guys would be wanting their votes, so you're going to start bowing to them rather than to other groups. Because I can tell you one thing, they'll all vote. They'll all vote. Because it will be part of the curriculum. Hey, it's election day. You guys, you'll have to. Oh, my phone. And you all have to go home. You'll have to go and vote, and they'll all do it. So you'll have 100% of that age group voting. Exactly.
Great.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us today and taking our questions and giving us lots to think about.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you for your time.
Okay, next up we have Jean McDonald.
I'm not official or anything. I've never run for office the way Andrea has. And I'm sure that you've heard a lot of statistics and a lot of people talking about, percentages of voting and da-da-da-da from lots of people. So I won't address that. When I was allowed to speak, I thought, well, I would rather go with something a lot more personal. And I had an uncle, Edwin Vale Abbott, who was an amazing man, graduated medical school from U of T in 1940, practiced as a physician for over 60 years, didn't make any money at it because he wanted to use his skills to help other people. And he did, like millions of people. He was amazing. So when he retired, he moved to Main Island in the Gulf Islands and became friends with Elizabeth May. When he died, she came to his funeral, and she said the greatest compliment anyone had ever paid her was when Uncle Ed said, "You're the only person I've ever voted for who actually got in." And as I say, he was an amazing guy, but when Elizabeth told me that, I thought, here was a guy who voted for 75 years, and he was only honestly represented once in his 95 years, which is, I think, a huge indictment against the first-past-the-post system, because here you have somebody who's contributed so much to society. I mean, even though voters, you can't judge who's good and who's bad, but he had no voice. And on a personal level, I was living in England in 1979 when Margaret Thatcher was first elected, came back to Canada, Ronald Reagan was elected, and then Brian Mulroney was elected. And no matter what your politics are, I think it's undeniable that we've had huge economic and societal changes since 1980. And I know, echoing Andrea there, I have not felt that I've had a voice for 45 years because nobody I voted for has got elected either or has formed a government. So I would love to see people able to feel that their vote actually counted. And I think you would have more people coming out to vote. You would have, our last federal election in Kimberley was a joke. The Liberals splitting. It was just, I was the chief electoral officer of my poll, and watching the returns come in and just hearing what people had to say was mind-blowing. And I thought, this doesn't work. It just does not work. People aren't heard. They don't feel that they have any stake in the whole system. And if they don't feel they have any stake in government, then they are less engaged with, they have less of a stake in society as a whole. So I beg, please consider alternatives to first past the post.
Jean, for your presentation. Are there any questions for Jean? MLA Clare.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. You pointed out that sometimes people vote for people who don't win, and it can be frustrating. I remember when I was in college, there was a person who advocated very strongly that Enver Hoxha's party should be one that people would support. She didn't have a lot of support, and she never did win, but I actually saw her run as a candidate a few times in the Lower Mainland. She moved down there, but she was very much pushing I think the Marxist-Leninists as her party, and I mean that's what she pushed, and she never had a successful election. And I think that it's the case that there are folks in a democracy who are going to win, and there are some who are going to lose. And it's certainly important that minority rights are respected and protected in the eventuality that when people vote, they vote in harsh ways that could affect minorities. And I'm not sure that changing systems necessarily provides the protections that many people are arguing they were going to seek. I'm not sure that the system we have now does this either. But we do have a fair bit of experience with a very stable system over many years. The Canadian parliamentary system has lasted 158 years. When we've watched empires collapse, countries collapse in their types of government, and undergo radical and not always very good changes. And I'm just wondering how you parse that.
That's an interesting concept, because I had a good friend who ran for the Rhino Party, the Rhinoceros Party.
They grew a couple of feet once, I understand.
But I know, as Mr. Botterill mentioned, and Ms. Dunlop, was that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. I know I actually did 50 years ago, spent several months in Israel, and the political landscape there is just nuts, because they don't have thresholds for that woman you said who ran for Marxist-Leninist. I doubt she would get 5% of the vote. So
she didn't hear either.
Yeah, so people who are really on the fringes, it's not difficult to come up with a mechanism to make sure, or Maxime Bernier, what did he get? The last federal election, he got 1.7% or something of the vote. He would not elect any MPs, or similar to that in the province. That wouldn't happen here either. But I think what would happen is that I know in our last provincial election, because I worked the polls there as well, that you got a lot of people who just didn't vote because they said, what is the point? I know which way I want to vote. I know that there's no way they'll get in, so they stayed home. Whereas if they felt that they had a stake in it, then they would be more engaged and they would turn up and vote. And I think I had heard somebody from the Green Party say, oh, well, we got less than 5% of the popular vote. And I think that if you had pro-rap, there's no way the Green Party would get 5% of the popular vote. It would be much, much higher.
I think that anyone who thinks that their single vote doesn't matter could look at both the federal and provincial elections and be persuaded otherwise based on the turnouts in some ridings.
Yeah, but the turnout in this riding, what happened was we had one candidate who sort of came out of nowhere. This was the federal election, stole a whole lot of votes from somebody else, and then who ended up the incumbent got in. And I'm not sure that he would have done otherwise. So, and I know I voted, and I thought, put my X and just thought, I'm just doing this because I want to be a good citizen, but it's useless. And a lot of people who thought, this is useless and I can't be bothered. So, yeah, it's certainly in the last federal election, single votes definitely mattered. But going into the election, I don't think anybody knew that.
That's democracy.
Yeah, well, there's that.
If we knew how it was going to go,
Well, sometimes it seems like we do.
then we wouldn't need elections, would we?
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Deputy Chair.
Thanks very much, Madam Chair, and thanks very much for your presentation, Jean. I love your uncle's story. Just to touch on a point with MLA Claire is that polls aren't always right. So,
Oh, no.
you know, people, you've seen it yourself. So my question to you is, do you think that a lot of the people are disappointed in the system because there isn't somebody specifically speaking on their behalf on specific issues? And I'm going to use the Greens as an example because a lot of times those concerns are more emotionally attached to maybe some of the fiscal realities that some of the other people might be more concerned about. Not to say that you're not concerned with fiscal reality, but
financial control.
I know.
TD Bank.
I know.
I am concerned.
Okay.
Green Party are concerned.
Okay.
Don't paint the Greens that way.
Okay, I wasn't trying to paint you as that way.
Okay.
I'm sorry for that.
Anyway.
I wasn't trying to.
Deputy
But my question was.
You can continue your question, but I just want to make sure we stay away from the parties and we go directly.
Honestly, I wasn't trying to imply that. I was trying to say that some people are more focused on their everyday life on fiscal things than some of the other things that are attaching them more emotionally, and that is particularly on the environment and climate change and things that, you know, really seriously affect them. So I apologize for that. But having said that, do you think that that's part of it? Is that you know, and that a person isn't standing up in your community on your behalf when you're having an opportunity to speak? You have to speak. You don't have a representative, an MLA, to be able to push what you're passionate about. Do you think that makes a difference?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
That's what I was trying to say.
Yeah, it definitely makes a difference. I mean, as Ms. Dunlop mentioned, yes, you can speak to an MLA who is more concerned with what you're concerned about. But, I mean, pardon me, we're all creatures of community. And if you feel that, okay, I want to talk to somebody in government who's talking about climate change, but they're representing a riding a long way away, it's not the same.
Right. That's what I was trying to get at, is that because you don't have, if you had proportional representation, in, let's say in this area, and there was 4 MLAs, and let's say for just argument's sake, one of them ended up being it could be a Green member, it could be an independent member, it could be anybody else, but it's not from the main parties. And you would feel that because when you're at a setting or when you're in a forum, your voices aren't going to have the same weight as everyone else's on an equal footing because you're the one that has to make that point, not the MLA. Is that part of it?
Yeah, to a point. But I think also one thing that would happen if we did have pro-rep is you were mentioning that, you know, what's the difference between having 2 people versus 10 people.
That's right.
Bringing up something. I think with, I know looking at democracies like Denmark, which is kind of like the poster child, that you have coalitions. So it's not going to be just 2 or 10. It will be a lot more because you will have not even party by party, but
a consensus
and issue by issue. And I think that's very important.
Great. Yeah, thanks for that.
Thank you. MLA Botterill?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. It's been a really wonderful discussion, and I really appreciate all the questions you've raised. And despite the way it was initially phrased, the deputy chair asked the question I was going to ask, so that's great.
consensus.
Lovely.
Loving the lack of communication.
It's all good.
Trying to make it big, it was just trying to frame it.
Okay, so our final question is from MLA Shaw.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your presentation. I don't really have a question. I just wanted to make a comment if the Chair would entertain. I really appreciate the time that you've taken to have this conversation with us, and I just want to bring back up again that I'm quite sensitive to the sort of the nature of the conversation that we're having, and that is that there is an issue about people feeling disenfranchised about the current system, and at least that's what's been communicated by yourself and some of the previous presenters. And also that I also agree with some of the previous presenters that the importance of things that matter to people is subjective at the end of the day. And we can talk about the importance of finances, and I would agree that is a top priority, but it actually may not be to a particular person who cares about something else. And so given that being the case and respecting the conversation that we're in, I do just want to point to this table. Every system and structure comes with terms and conditions and rules of operation, and those who participate in that system kind of try to, or maybe don't try to, but still to some degree have to function within those limitations. And so I just want to say that I appreciate that there are many of you here today who do not think that the current system that we has that that platform that is conducive to a representative conversation of all of your interests. I just acknowledge that. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Jean, for sharing your presentation with us today and answering our questions. We're going to take a short break to 7:10, and then we will return. We will be starting promptly at 7:10. I'm looking at our committee members.
I'm not going
Okay, welcome back. We will get started next with Karen Barkley. Hi, Karen. Thank you for presenting to us today. So just a reminder, you have 5 minutes for your presentation, followed by 5 minutes for questions.
Great. Thank you. Thank you all. I'm a resident of Wilmer, BC, which is up near Invermere, if you don't know, a little hamlet. I appreciate the opportunity to present to the committee today, and I also really want to applaud the NDP and the Green Party for pulling this together and taking this step forward in hopefully creating an electoral system which will ensure that every vote does matter. I have been an active political citizen, knocking on doors for political parties and candidates, presenting to MLAs and MPs on climate change and electoral reform, getting petitions signed when Trudeau broke his promise on electoral reform, distributing door hangers, writing letters to the local paper. In fact, I think I'm a politician's dream citizen. But I am a very frustrated citizen. All I do is vote strategically. I do not get to vote for what I truly support or believe in, and I'm always making compromises with my own values. And I would like to be able to vote for the party or candidate of my choice before I die. There is still time. And additionally, we are all really worried about the degradation of democracy around the world, but particularly what we see going on in the US right now. We have the same seeds of discontent and misinformation in our country. And the last federal election demonstrated the risks of what if we move towards a two-party system. There are many challenges and changes needed in our system to ensure we continue to have a healthy democracy. Electoral reform to a proportional system is one of the most important. All measurements of good governance and level of participation of citizens improve under these systems. And one measure of good governance that improves under PR is representation of women in government. On average, countries with proportional representation have more women in their legislature. We are only around 30% in Canada, give or take a little bit more provincially. And women are becoming more concerned about running due to the increased partisanship and risk of violence towards elected officials, and that's towards all elected officials, not just women. PR reduces partisanship as parties need to work benefits, as there are many, but my biggest question is, what are we waiting for? I also hear, because I think you've had tons of presentations and probably will have many on different forms of proportional representation or different systems, and I'll say that I do not support ranked ballots, as those are not proportional. I do support the basic principles of PR, which is mixed member ridings and top-up seats. And the specific format that is adopted in BC should really be based on the geographic challenges of BC. So something with a regional component to it would be preferable. A national poll by ECOS in January of this year showed an overwhelming majority of Canadians, 68%, support moving towards a form of proportional representation. Only 19% were opposed. And this tells me that the whole country is giving green lights to our elected representatives to go ahead with electoral reform to a proportional system. I don't support taking this to a referendum because I think the questions always become very confusing. And again, you get into misinformation and discontent, and it biases the outcomes. This is a technical issue in terms of the electoral system, and we've hired you, in essence, to do this. So please take this forward. Institute the reform before the next election, work collaboratively with all parties to design the system that works best for BC. Proportional representation will benefit all parties, and even more importantly, it will benefit each citizen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen, for your presentation. I will go to MLA Clare for the first question.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation, Karen. Appreciate that. you're probably aware that the BC Legislature currently has a majority of women MLAs seating in the House.
Oh, I actually wasn't, but thank you, and that is great.
Yeah, they're 52%, a little over 50, almost 53% of the 93 seats. There's 31 NDP and 18 Conservative female MLAs in the House, which is quite impressive. The Yukon has also had a majority of women in one case, and I think the federal Parliament has 31%. So there have been gains made even under the current system. And I wonder, what do you feel about a bicameral system in some of the provincial legislatures to provide more regional representation, as opposed to other changes that might be? In two provinces, they have the ability to have bicameral, like a Senate has as well as a Commons. Yeah, I think Newfoundland is one, Quebec is another, that have that ability. BC does not have a bicameral system. We have a unicameral system with just a House of Commons in the legislature. And sometimes people are concerned about regional representation beyond just representation by population. I wondered what your views were on that aspect.
Sorry, I don't really have a view on the bicameral part. I hadn't really considered that. But the regional, I think, is very important in BC, particularly because of the rural-urban population divide, and we have such large ridings. I mean, I live in one of the large ridings, and so even for a representative to have to go through the whole riding before they're elected is crazy. So if you have more representation in these large ridings, then there's going to be more connection with communities, there's going to be more dialogue, there'll be more representation overall. So regionally, I think is important.
And I appreciate your comments, because the campaigning period, of course, is one of the longest job interviews every candidate has.
Indeed.
And so, yes, we did get hired. And I thank you for your answer.
Thank you. Any further questions? Okay, I don't see any further questions. Thank you so much, Karen, for your presentation. Next, we have Sue Cairns. Cairns.
Karen's, thanks.
Karen's. Oh, yeah. I was trying to say like how it's said in Australia, but I was wrong.
Okay. And it is like Karen's Australia. It is spelt that way, but it's Scottish.
Welcome, Sue. So just a reminder, you'll have 5 minutes for your presentation, followed by 5 minutes for questions.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you. I really appreciate this opportunity to participate in democracy, and that feels like quite an honor these days. And also, as Karen mentioned, a deep appreciation to the Green Party and to the BC NDP for actually making this all happen. And I was quite excited coming here tonight to know that there was an opportunity to participate and speak up. So I'm a Kimberley City Councillor. I'm a retired professional forester with Provincial Resource Ministries and Indigenous Nations on G2G agreements for the last 25 years. And I'm a parent and I'm an advocate, deeply concerned about human rights and the earth that we all depend on. Our democracy needs to be strengthened. We're watching governments representing only the few increasingly taking power around the world, and who can't appropriately engage in the crises that we're facing. In BC's election last October, extreme voices, led by a person who had been pushed out of the BC Liberals for denying climate science, almost formed government. Where would we be today if that had happened and he were our premier? It's, imagine anti-science, anti-United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, anti-SOGI, anti-vax, identity politics rather than anything based on policy solutions. And we saw an alarmingly close spring federal election that could have resulted in our own current US-style prime minister. Where would that have put us on the global stage? And what about our sovereignty? Let's not leave this to luck anymore. Proportional representation is needed now, and it's critical that it be in place before the next election. We know from evidence that over the long run, countries with proportional representation show better outcomes on the broad range of issues because people are fairly represented and parties work together to find solutions. I don't support another referendum because it will take too long and likely to be ineffective because the average voter is not in a position to consider all the options and the evidence and to choose what makes the most sense for BC. I do support models of proportional representation that include multi-member ridings, top-up seats, or both. I'm open to different systems under the principles of proportional representation and the basic elements, multi-member ridings, top-up seats of both the mainstream PR systems. I do support a ranked ballot in a proportional system, but not another winner-take-all system with ranked ballots in a single-member riding, which would retain all the problems of first past the post. I think the model has to be regionally based, in which voters personally elect all candidates, so those candidates are accountable to those people. So it has a local and a regional representation. Let's get through this. I'd like to see this in just simply move forward, do a trial. Let's make it happen. Let's get out of the negative politics of politicians spending their time making each other wrong, and the real and urgent work being lost. Let's bring representative voices to the table to responsibly work on constructive long-term solutions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sue. Do we have any questions for Sue? Emily Shaw.
Thank you, Sue, for your presentation. You mentioned that you're a Kimberley City Councillor.
Right.
And I'm wondering if you can expand on your experience about your municipal journey and how you felt the process was for you as you sought election in Kimberley.
Well, I really like local government because there's no parties. And so, we have the opportunity to work together at the table, and so very focused on the ground issues. And so I really feel like we have a huge opportunity at the local government level to focus in on our shared values and our shared issues and make things work. So it's a satisfying, very fulfilling role to be able to work together with people with, often very different views, but finding a pathway forward.
Thank you. Just building on that, I think it's interesting because coming from a populous city, both from Surrey, we do have quite large slates actually that run at a municipal level. So, and we run our municipal elections at the same time as our school board elections. So those are some very large, long ballots that we're working off of. And some of the conversations we had in previous rooms were about ranked ballots and potentially testing them first with municipal elections and seeing how that works, and kind of using that as a test potentially before seeing what we can do provincially. So I just would like your thoughts on that as well.
That's interesting. I actually, that's a completely new idea that I hadn't thought about at all. I guess, let's see, and we do have local government elections coming up in just over a year. So timing-wise, it might be a good opportunity to test that. I don't really have a response. I haven't. I think about that, and I do like the idea of testing things, and I like incremental approaches so that we can, dial it in as we go along. So it's an interesting idea. Yeah.
It's an idea for us as well, right? We don't know, and we're just trying to get your thoughts. So thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Emily Butterell?
Yeah, thanks for your presentation. You mentioned, you've made the point about proportional representation and moving now on it. One of the other items we talked about a little earlier this evening, and just wondered about your thoughts as well on reducing the voting age to 16.
I love it. I've been really keen on that for quite some time, and there's a lot of young people who are very engaged, and I'd say very well informed, and also are losing hope. And I think that they're brilliant. There's so many brilliant young minds out there, and we need to hear those voices. They're the ones who are, they see things differently. They see opportunities that we don't necessarily see because we've been in a system for a very long time. And I know with my kids and with their friends that they'll often just, come up with comments about, well, why didn't we do it this way, or why not that way? And it's they're the best questions. Sometimes it's it's really those excellent questions about why didn't we try that, and maybe now's the time. So I think reducing the voting age would be a great idea.
Great. Thank you so much, Sue. I don't see any further questions, so thank you so much for your time today.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And our final presenter is Bruce Wilson.
Thank you. And before we go on record, my sincere thanks for accommodating me. I do apologize humbly for missing my allotted slot.
We're happy to hear from you. So as mentioned, you have 5 minutes for your presentation, followed by 5 minutes for questions. Please get started once you're ready.
Well, good evening to you, and thank you for being here to listen to the opinions from the East Kootenays. I want to say just a little bit about me. I was born and raised in Scotland. I came to Canada in the 80s, to Calgary, where I met my future wife. As a former general manager of Shell, we were fortunate to experience life in many countries over 3 decades. I left the oil and gas industry 7 years ago, deeply concerned by the growing impact of climate change. I now consult on international renewable energy projects from my home in Kimberley, BC. I wish to speak in support of proportional representation, which I believe is critical to a well-functioning and engaged multi-party democracy. PR is the antidote to the corrosive effect of political polarization. As I speak to you tonight, I also address these comments to my fellow citizens in BC and in Canada, and in full disclosure, I remain a dual citizen of both the United Kingdom and Canada, and have experience of voting systems in both countries. To the people of BC, I encourage you to inform yourself. I want to be clear that I'm not standing here as an expert on proportional representation, but I understand that democracies thrive when the electorate is well informed and engaged. Each of you has to choose to be informed. Real democratic participation calls for more than simply putting an X in a box. So I urge all of you who are watching this, or in this case, listening to it, to read up on the basics of proportional representation, why it matters and how it works. And if you continue to believe that the current system is working just fine, I am here to ask you to think again and to look at the facts and consider the dangers of inadvertently locking Canada into a perpetual two-party system. So let's recognize that the existing electoral system does not work. First past the post-elections, a winner-takes-all approach do not produce representative results. The results invariably ensure that a large percentage of the population is not effectively represented. Parties gaining a substantial share of the vote may have few seats to show for it. We saw this in the recent federal election. First past the post also skews how voters participate. People may feel obliged to abandon their preferred candidate and oppose another candidate. We use the term strategic voting to put a better face on a system that allows little flexibility to choose good and capable leaders. Political participation must matter. It must allow people to make their best choices, to elect and be represented by competent leaders, to be represented by capable individuals. And our Parliament must be representative of all views, no matter what they are. Bringing diverse viewpoints to the forum will only make us stronger. First past the post system is a historical artifact. In a modern multi-party democracy, there's no place for obsolete ways. Proportional representation is the most popular form of democracy in the world today, centered on the simple idea that the numbers for each political group in Parliament should closely match their popularity in the country. For most countries, this idea is at the core of their democratic ideals. This basic principle restores faith in democracy because if you think election is unfair, you're more likely not to choose not to vote. And it follows that if an election is perceived as unfair, citizens are less likely to accept outcomes and policies made by their new government. We have hard things to fix and difficult decisions to make. At a time when the world faces multiple crises, we need strong consensus, leadership that is representative of the diversity of thought in our nation. We can no longer accept narrow party views, but must ensure that we build a broad political base. Climate change, the overarching crisis of our time, competes for attention with perma-wars, global instability, senseless tariffs, and the steady march of AI, along with the day-to-day challenges of simply navigating the cost of living. There are various forms of proportional representation, and it's not my place to try to educate you on those, whether it's ranked choice voting, also called single transferable, or mixed member. There are virtues and benefits in each. I would like to say something, I see that I'm out of time, I would like to say something about citizens' assemblies and the effectiveness of those in choosing a path forward.
Finish that. Did you want to still?
If I may.
Yes, go ahead.
Important changes need consensus, but without a detailed and factual grounding of the issues, referenda can lead to political shifts that take generations to undo. Brexit demonstrated this amply. I believe that citizens' assemblies are fundamental to achieving a better democracy. The Scottish experience has been nothing short of miraculous in that regard. It has been fabulous to watch the evolution of citizens' assemblies in Scotland, where disparate people with very divergent views have come together in a way that has built consensus. It has been marvellous to look at a Scottish government that actually has listened to these and is mandated to address the issues that come from these citizens' assemblies. If they are well chosen, if they are fully representative of the broad cross-section of a population, they can do the difficult work of understanding those complex issues that will drive our democracy forward. I do not believe in a referendum as such. I believe that we must vest the power of decision within citizens' assemblies. A well-informed electorate can make these decisions effectively, and I urge you to consider that option. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. A question from MLA Shaw.
Thank you, Bruce, for your presentation. I'm interested in knowing how or what you think government can do or members can do in general to keep the general public well engaged. Part of our task here is also to look into democratic engagement. And I think some of us have discussed some of the challenges that MLAs actually face in engaging to their best and fullest capacity based on things like geographical enormities of the rural aspect, also the funds that we are provided in our constituency offices to engage with the public, especially given today's circumstances. And so we share some challenges, but despite that, do you think that there's something practical that, for example, MLAs can do or that government can do to assist in consistently and continuously keeping the general public engaged?
Absolutely. The first thing you've got to do is build trust. It hasn't evaporated, but it's at a low ebb. And I think in order to build trust, the kind of citizens' assembly approach And let's not forget, citizens' assemblies can be used for a variety of different things. In Scotland, they were used for women's rights, they were used for electoral reform, they were used for climate change. You asked the question to Sue Kearns about trying these things out in a municipal setting. I think that is the way to build trust. It's the way to build knowledge. How do you engage? You engage by informing, you engage by asking, you engage by testing and demonstrating and transparency. The Scottish experience has been that the single transferable vote that was used in the municipal elections worked exceptionally well, and people were very pleased with it. It had a high level of acceptance. The additional member system that is used in the Scottish Parliament, on the other hand, which is actually a blend of proportional and first past the post, it was fraught with issues, and those need to be fixed. The kind of transparency that comes from that is really going to be instructive. And, in essence, the sort of, I don't want to use the word gamifying, but it came up, this sense of the search for a Canada-wide citizens' assembly, where 50,000 people apply and 500 are chosen. That kind of sense of the strong participation, the opportunities to participate is going to move us forward.
Thank you. Thank you. MLA Botterill.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm juxtaposing two parts to your presentation. The first part is the urgency of proceeding with pro-rep as a systemic change to deal with some of the concerns associated with first past the post, and then your perspective on the how. And how we would go about this. And so I just want to make sure I understand how you would see I want to sort of active listening. I want to make sure I understand your perspective on the how, which I think would be, and none of this has been decided. I mean, we're just gathering information, but we could, for example, recommend proportional representation. And then in the way you're describing it, then we would have a citizens' assembly that would develop the precise model, and then we would move to implement that model. Is that sort of it is? Can you describe a bit more about what would happen over the next year and a half under your preferred approach?
For sure. Let me say something, first of all, about the opportunities that it presents, which is in terms of leadership. I feel very strongly that these are challenging times. We're in, as many people describe it, a perma-crisis where there are very complex issues. We need good leadership. We need consensus. We need the equivalent of a war cabinet where we set aside our political differences and just bring our ideas. And we need all sorts of ideas. I strongly advocate for every cross-section of ideas to come to the table. That diversity makes us strong. Good leaders are dissuaded from running. This is a generalization, but I do believe that good leaders, strong leaders, capable individuals are dissuaded from participating in politics, and this is a time to encourage them. We have to put that cart before the horse a little there, or put that as a priority issue to assure those kind of individuals that we will have a system that enables that. So that's the first thing. We have the intent. We signal that intent, and then we test this. And we don't need to test it we test the idea of a citizens' assembly. Scotland, the people who participated and the government of Scotland described the Citizens' Assembly as a mini Scotland. They did it so well, they said this is a cross-section of ages, a cross-section of skills, background, walks of life, attitudes. In essence, they represented the people. And it was done in such a public way that there was license from the Scottish people to say, we accept you as that. of course, we accept members of Parliament, MLAs, as being representative of our views. Why would we not take a cross-section, and a very highly representative cross-section of the people, and say, these people speak for us? I think embedding that idea, however small initially, whatever topic that is, make it work, make it transparent, make it visible, make it of the people. Really make it sing, and then take it to progressively harder, more emotive topics. Also, most of our problems are borderless problems. They're shared by other countries. Let's learn. We like to think of ourselves as leaders, and in some ways we are, but in this case of electoral reform, we are not. Let's learn, and that experience, I think, will be very instructive.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you, Bruce. I don't see any further questions, so thank you so much for taking the time, and thank you to all the presenters for taking the time to be with us today and share your thoughts with the committee. We really do appreciate you making this great effort to be here. Thank you. That's the last of our presentations. Could I please have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
The committee is now adjourned. Thank you.